The studio froze. Tom Hanks stopped mid-sentence and stared into the audience at one man. Jimmy Fallon's smile vanished. The cameras kept rolling, but nobody knew what was happening. The Roots stopped playing. 300 people held their breath. And in that moment, The Tonight Show became something it had never been before, a place where the past collided with the present in the most unexpected way. What happened next would change how we see Tom Hanks, how we understand Jimmy Fallon's leadership, and why sometimes the most powerful moments on television are the ones nobody planned. If you want to see how this unbelievable moment unfolded, subscribe now because what you're about to witness will restore your faith in humanity. It was supposed to be a regular Tuesday night taping. October 2024. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Tom Hanks was scheduled to promote his latest film, a heartwarming drama about fathers and sons. The pre-interview had gone smoothly. Hanks was his usual charming self, cracking jokes with the producers, hugging staff members, asking about their families. Jimmy was in his element, energized by having one of Hollywood's most beloved actors in his guest chair. The audience filed in at 4:30 p.m., buzzing with excitement. Among them was a man named Robert Chin, 71 years old, wearing a simple blue cardigan and khaki pants. He had driven 6 hours from Pennsylvania with his daughter, who had surprised him with tickets for his birthday. Robert had been a Tom Hanks fan since the 1980s. He'd seen every movie. But there was something deeper. Something nobody in that studio knew yet. The show started exactly as planned. Jimmy delivered his monologue. The audience laughed. The band played. Everything was going according to the carefully timed script that makes late-night television look effortless. At 5:47 p.m., Tom Hanks walked through those famous rainbow curtains. The crowd erupted. Jimmy shook his hand. They sat down. The interview began. But 12 minutes into that conversation, Jimmy Fallon would witness something that would haunt him for the rest of his career, in the most beautiful way possible. Tom was telling a story about working with a child actor on his new film. He was animated, funny, doing the voices. Jimmy was laughing genuinely, the way he does when he's truly enjoying himself. The cameras captured every angle. The producers in the control room were pleased. This was good television. And then Tom Hanks stopped talking. Not a dramatic pause for effect. Not a comedic beat. He just stopped. His eyes fixed on something in the audience. Row 4, seat 12. His face changed. The smile disappeared. His mouth opened slightly. Jimmy noticed immediately. He'd done thousands of interviews. He knew when something was wrong. "Tom?" Jimmy said, his voice uncertain. "You okay?" Tom didn't answer. He was staring at Robert Chin, who was sitting perfectly still, tears beginning to stream down his weathered face. Robert's daughter grabbed her father's hand, confused. The audience started murmuring. The Roots exchanged glances. The cameras didn't know where to point. Tom Hanks stood up from his chair. "I'm sorry," Tom said, not to Jimmy, but to everyone. "I'm so sorry. I need a moment." Jimmy Fallon stood too, instinctively. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't in any script. The producers were frantically talking into their headsets. "Do we cut to commercial? Do we keep rolling? What's happening?" Tom walked to the edge of the stage. He looked directly at Robert. "Sir?" he said, his voice shaking. "Sir, is that you?" Robert nodded. He couldn't speak. His daughter was crying now too, though she didn't understand why. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Jimmy Fallon did something in that moment that revealed everything about who he really is as a host, as a leader, as a human being. He could have gone to commercial. He could have made a joke to ease the tension. He could have protected the show's format, its rhythm, its carefully constructed television magic. Instead, he made a choice that would define his legacy. He walked over to Tom Hanks and said quietly but clearly, "Whatever you need. We've got time." Then he turned to the audience and said, "We're going to take a moment here. Something important is happening." The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent. They stayed silent. Tom Hanks, one of the most composed actors in Hollywood, climbed down from the stage. Security didn't stop him. Jimmy nodded to them. Let him go. Tom walked up the aisle to row 4. He stopped in front of Robert Chin. The cameras followed, but from a distance. Respectful. Jimmy had signaled to the crew, keep shooting, but give them space. You probably don't remember me, Robert said, his voice breaking. It was 1987. Vietnam Veterans Benefit Concert in Philadelphia. I was not in a good place. I was homeless. I was sitting outside the venue, and you... Tom knelt down in front of Robert's seat. The entire studio was holding its breath. You gave me your jacket, Robert continued. It was raining. You were nobody then. Just a young actor. You had every reason to walk past me. But you stopped. You talked to me for 20 minutes. You told me your father was a veteran. You told me things could get better. You gave me a card with a phone number for a VA counselor. You gave me $40. You gave me your jacket. Tom's eyes were wet. I remember, he whispered. I remember you. You told me about your daughter. You said you hadn't seen her in 3 years? Robert looked at the woman next to him. This is her. This is Sarah. I got help. I got clean. I found her. I've been sober for 36 years. I have grandchildren. I have a life. Because you stopped. The audience wasn't silent anymore. They were crying. Openly. Jimmy Fallon was standing at the edge of the stage, tears streaming down his face, his hand over his mouth. Behind the scenes, something was happening that nobody watching at home would ever know, but it would change everything about how The Tonight Show operated from that night forward. Tom Hanks reached into his pocket. He pulled out his wallet. From it, he removed a small, worn photograph. It was yellowed with age. He handed it to Robert. You gave this to me that night, Tom said. It's you and your daughter. You were holding her when she was a baby. You said it was the only picture you had left. You said you wanted me to keep it so someone would remember you existed in case you didn't make it. Robert stared at the photograph. His hands shook as he held it. You kept it. All these years. I kept it, Tom said. I kept it in my wallet. Every movie, every premiere, every moment of my life, you were there. You reminded me why any of this matters. Tom took off his watch. It was a simple watch, not expensive, just meaningful. This was my father's, he said. He was a Navy cook. He served in Vietnam. He struggled when he came home, just like you did. He got help too, but later. Much later. I want you to have this. I can't. Robert started to say. You can't, Tom said. You already gave me something more valuable than anything I could ever give you. You let me be human on a night when I needed to be reminded that success isn't about fame. It's about the moments when nobody's watching. Jimmy Fallon walked down into the audience. He didn't ask permission. He just knew this was bigger than television. He stood next to Tom Hanks and Robert Chin. He put his hand on Robert's shoulder. Mr. Chin, Jimmy said, would you and your daughter join us on stage? The audience exploded into applause. Not polite applause. Not television applause. Real, thunderous, standing applause that lasted for 3 full minutes. Robert and Sarah walked onto the Tonight Show stage, arm in arm, both crying. Tom Hanks walked with them. Jimmy guided them to the couch. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Jimmy Fallon sat down at his desk. He looked at the camera. His voice was steady but full of emotion. We're going to do something we've never done before, he said. We're not going to air the rest of the show we planned. This is the show. This moment. This story. Because this is what matters. The producers in the booth were panicking. They had segments prepared. They had a musical guest. They had a tight schedule. Jimmy Fallon had just thrown away an entire show. But he didn't care. Jimmy turned to Robert. "Tell us about your journey. Tell us what happened after that night in 1987. And Robert did. For the next 40 minutes, with no commercial breaks, The Tonight Show became something different. Robert talked about his service in Vietnam. He talked about coming home to a country that didn't know how to help him. He talked about his descent into addiction and homelessness. He talked about losing his family. He talked about that rainy night in Philadelphia when a young actor named Tom Hanks treated him like a human being when the world had made him feel invisible. Sarah talked about searching for her father for years. She talked about the moment they reunited. She talked about rebuilding their relationship. She talked about forgiveness, about healing, about the long road back. Tom Hanks sat quietly, letting them speak. When Jimmy asked him why he kept the photograph all these years, Tom's answer was simple. "Because Robert reminded me of something essential. We're all one bad break away from needing someone to stop and see us. Fame doesn't exempt you from humanity. It obligates you to it." The show that aired that night was unlike anything in late-night television history. No jokes. No games. No celebrity gossip. Just 3 people and a story about compassion, memory, and the invisible threads that connect us across decades. The ratings were the highest The Tonight Show had seen in 5 years. But more importantly, something shifted in American culture that night. The clip went viral, but not in the usual way. It wasn't mocked or memed. It was shared with reverence. Veterans organizations reported a 300% increase in calls to their hotlines in the following week. Homeless outreach programs saw unprecedented volunteer applications. People started talking about the small acts of kindness they'd witnessed or received, sharing their own stories of strangers who'd changed their lives. Jimmy Fallon received over 100,000 letters in the following month. Not fan mail. Letters from people sharing their stories. Letters from people thanking him for using his platform for something real. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. 3 weeks after that episode aired, Robert Chin and his daughter were invited back to The Tonight Show. But this time, something had changed. Jimmy had spent those 3 weeks working with veterans organizations, homeless advocacy groups, and mental health professionals. He announced a new initiative. The Tonight Show would dedicate 1 episode every month to stories of resilience and recovery, giving a platform to voices that television usually ignores. Tom Hanks appeared via video call. He announced that he and Robert had started a foundation together, funded entirely by Tom, focused on connecting homeless veterans with the resources they need. It was called the $40 Foundation, named after the money Tom gave Robert that rainy night. But the most powerful moment came when Jimmy showed what he'd done with his own Tonight Show desk. He'd had a small plaque installed on the underside, where only he could see it when he sat down. It read, "Remember Robert. Remember why this matters." Jimmy explained to the audience, his voice thick with emotion. "Every night I sit at this desk, I'm going to see those words. Because Tom taught me something that night. This desk, this stage, these cameras, they're not about making people laugh, though that's wonderful. They're not about entertainment, though that's important. They're about connection. They're about using whatever platform you have to remind people that they're seen. That they matter. That their story isn't over." He reached under his desk and pulled out something small. It was a folded piece of paper. "Robert gave this to me after the show," Jimmy said. "It's a note he wrote to himself in 1987, the day after he met Tom. It says, 'Someone saw me today. Someone cared. Maybe I can make it.'" He carried this note for 36 years. Jimmy carefully unfolded it and showed it to the camera. The paper was worn, the ink faded, but the words were clear. The audience was silent. You could hear people crying. "I'm going to keep this in my desk drawer," Jimmy said. "Right next to my emergency cards and my backup jokes and all the things I think I need to do this job. But really, the only thing I need is this. A reminder that television is just a medium. Humanity is the message." Robert stood up and hugged Jimmy. Then he hugged Tom via the screen. The audience rose to their feet. Not in applause, but in solidarity. In recognition. In remembrance of every person they'd ever walked past without seeing. The episode ended with no music, no jokes, no fanfare. Just Jimmy looking into the camera and saying 7 words that would become his legacy. See people. Stop. It changes everything. The watch Tom gave Robert still sits on Robert's wrist. The photograph Tom carried for 37 years is now framed in Robert's home, next to a picture from that Tonight Show episode. And every night, when Jimmy Fallon sits at his desk, he touches that plaque and remembers, this is why it matters. Not because of the ratings. Not because of the viral clips. But because one night, when he could have protected the show, he protected something bigger. He protected a moment of human connection. And in doing so, he reminded millions of people watching that the smallest acts of kindness echo across decades. Tom Hanks was right. We're all one bad break away from needing someone to stop and see us. And that night, Jimmy Fallon proved that sometimes the bravest thing a host can do is stop hosting and start being human.